Hello, my name is Donna Bulseco. I'm editor of Intima, a journal of narrative medicine. And I'd like to introduce Alekszandra Rokvity, who will be interviewing writer Kylie Maslen, author of Show Me Where It Hurts, Living with Invisible Illness, a powerful collection of essays that speak to those who've encountered the brush off from doctors, faced endless tests and treatments, and endured chronic pain and suffering. Alekszandra is a Serbian-born writer and PhD candidate working on her doctorate between the Karl Franzens University of Graz in Austria and the University of Alberta in Canada. She specializes in cultural studies and medical humanities. Her academic interest lies in the experience of women with endometriosis within the healthcare system. Her doctoral dissertation is a case study of endometriosis that explores the connection between gender bias in medical community and the social discourse surrounding menstruation. Ms. Rokvity has previously taught in Austria, Canada, Vietnam, and is currently teaching in Belgrade, Serbia. Welcome, Alekszandra.
Thank you so much.
A short introduction of Kylie. Kylie Maslen is a writer and critic. Her work has appeared in The Guardian, Meanjin, Kill Your Darlings, Adelaide Review, Crikey, and Junkie, among other outlets. In 2018, she was the recipient of the Kill Your Darlings New Critics Award, and her essay, I'm Trying to Tell You I'm Not Okay, was longlisted for the Lifted Brow and RMIT Nonfiction Lab Prize for experimental nonfiction. She lives in Adelaide on Kaurna country. So thank you both. And Alekszandra, take it away.
Thank you so much, Donna, for these introductions. And hello, Kylie, and welcome. And thank you for agreeing to this and for agreeing to talk to me.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's I'm really blown away by Intima and by the work that you all are doing. So yeah, it feels like a real honor. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thank you. That's very kind of you to say. Well, first of all, I would just like to ask you a very basic question in the beginning for people who might not have read the book yet or are not familiar with your exact topic. What is this invisible illness that is in your title, and why did you call it invisible, or illnesses to be exact, in the case of your book?
Yeah, so I have multiple invisible illnesses. On the physical side of things, I have endometriosis, polycystic ovarian syndrome, and chronic pelvic pain. But I also have a number of mental illnesses, primarily bipolar disorder. Living with illnesses that are invisible poses a unique challenge where you are constantly sort of having to fight for attention because things are not self-evident. So to me, this book is about not only shining a light on these conditions, which are not always well known, it's certainly not well understood, but also sort of giving a voice to people who have invisible illnesses. And I hope that by sharing my experiences, it will grow a deeper empathy and understanding of what it's like in our sort of daily lives, I guess.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And I think that you really did succeed, that your book succeeded in all of your goals. I'm a big fan. I really enjoyed reading it, honestly.
Oh,
but I have, from what I've learned about you, is that you were or are primarily an essayist, and you touched on art, health, even football. So you kind of mastered the short form. And what made you decide that you wanted to do a book? What made you decide to build this bigger piece of work than what you're used to?
Well, I mean, it had always been a dream of mine to write a book. I think every writer, that's what we aspire to do at some point in our careers. I had written as the Kill Your Darlings new critic. Apologies. Before that, I had written for Kill Your Darlings an earlier version of the essay that became Ask Me How I Am, which explores my I don't label it as addiction in the book, but I later came to terms with the fact that it is addiction, to alcohol and prescription drugs as a way of coping with the pain that I was experiencing. And that essay had done really well. It was really well received. And I really kind of opened up something within me. I had wanted to write about my health for some time, but I hadn't really found my way into it. And this gave me confidence as well, to know that there were other people who could identify with some of these experiences and who were grateful to have these experiences brought to light a little. And then, the first essay in the book, I'm trying to tell you I'm not okay, that had been longlisted for a nonfiction prize here. And so I was, kind of seeing my work kind of be useful, I guess, in a way. And I really wanted to advocate not only for myself, but for the community around me. And I started to think, I think this could be a book. Like, I think there's a lot more to say than I had said in those two essays. I was then really fortunate in that I was able to secure a mentorship with a phenomenal Australian writer, Fiona Wright, who is a poet who has written about illness and the body. And she kind of really helped me to shape a proposal for the book and some, early work for the book. And I'm really grateful for her support. And she continues to mentor what we kind of joke as like sick lit writers here in Australia, of which there is an increasing number. So all these things are kind of slowly happening. I had growing confidence that this was more than I could achieve in short form and needed to be fleshed out. And I guess part of that is almost a metaphor for living with invisible illness, that we think of it as, or it is diminished, or it is not given enough spotlight. And then as you start to engage with it and engage with people who have these experiences, you find that there's so much else going on under the surface.
Exactly. And I'm very glad that you mentioned the beginning of the book. I'm obviously, Donna mentioned that I'm doing research on endometriosis because I do have it myself. So I was one of those, I guess, biased readers, right? I kind of came in with an expectation, and it's why I picked the book up. And I'm glad you mentioned the beginning and this essay that then turned into the first chapter or chapters. This part about alcohol and dating apps, this whole beginning, I really I can relate to it to a certain extent, but I had the feeling of while I was reading it, at some point I just went, oh my God, I can't believe she said it. And it's one of those things that are familiar, in which I think that a lot of people in the community relate to at least a certain extent, at least at some part of your life, especially if you've been suffering since a young age. But it isn't talked about so much. And my reaction wasn't negative, it was more like excitement, like, wow, she really, she really said it like it is. And then I wondered, and I wanted to ask you, did you have any doubts on where to draw the line or how honest to be? Because I really felt there were parts that were very raw and very honest, and I'm not sure if I would be able to write some of that stuff down and show it to the world. So I think it's also very brave of you. But I genuinely had this, some memories coming back, and like, cannot believe this girl wrote this down and sent it out into the world. Did you have any doubts about that, or did you know straight away if you're doing it completely honestly?
Yeah, I didn't have any doubts while I was writing. Like you say, I kind of thought, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to really do it. And I think because, because of your reaction, like, where have we seen this before? And a lot of the motivation for the book for me was about providing a narrative that I had always wanted for myself, that I had, if I had had someone talking to me about these things, or if I had had the ability to read this book as a teenager, I think it would have changed my life. And that is, sounds quite aggrandizing to say about your own work, but
no, it doesn't, because I think it's amazing, and I think it's very true. We need books like that, and I wish I had read it when I was a teenager. I wish that you had already written it when I was much younger. So it's not aggrandizing. It's the truth.
Thank you.
If I could just add too, that I think it's not only the people who, have a certain condition or have endometriosis, but it's also the caregivers. There is such a focus for clinicians on the labs, on, the pain scale, the, the facts and the data, and having an incredibly expressed, honest portrayal or depiction of how someone feels about a condition is really important for them, to read that, because that's not what's included in their medical training.
No, absolutely not, and that's a real problem, really, with the medical establishment, the way that doctors are trained. There's quite a bit in the book about, then their reliance on quantitative data when we live in a qualitative way.
Right.
And there was, you mentioned caregivers and their role in this as well. And there was was a real need for me to talk about that relationship as well, as there is a chapter in the book sort of dedicated to the support systems around me. And, you know, without them, to be completely honest, I wouldn't still be here today. But I wanted to go, there's a whole chapter about the support systems, because there's a real kind of push and pull of needing people's support, and the narrative of the support people overshadowing that of the patient. I'm thinking of there is criticism is sometimes directed towards parents of people with disabilities, in that their stories are provided or given air to before that of the disabled person themselves. So it's a tricky line to balance. But I wanted to write that chapter also as a way of thanks to my mum and to my brother, who, you know, really have dealt with some tough stuff. I wasn't diagnosed with my primary mental illness until I was 35. So they have really copped it at times. They've had to deal with and sort of just really kind of watch some not great stuff happen. And there needs to be a voice. There needs to be a voice for these people as well. But it's about negotiating that balance between, prioritizing the voices of lived experience.
Mm-hmm.
I think when you say about the bravery or the honesty of the book, I will say though that I didn't have any qualms while I was writing it, but when it came to the editing stage, or the when it had gone off to be published and I was waiting to get the copies in and for it to be on shelves and all that kind of thing, that was the point where I was like, oh God, what are my aunties going to say? What are my bosses going to say? I've been very fortunate that they have been overwhelmingly supportive and kind. But it wasn't until I kind of had that moment of quiet reflection that I was mildly terrified for about 2 weeks.
I suppose that's the moment when it becomes real, right? It's not just you with the text anymore. You're aware that other people are going to read it as well. But I'm very happy to hear that you got positive and supportive reactions from the most important people. But I also wanted to ask you about reactions from strangers, because in my experience, any person that starts talking about, well, I'm mainly focused on endometriosis, but mental health as well, openly online or in essays or blogs or in any sort of form, suddenly they get this influx of messages from people who relate, or want to ask questions or something like that. A high engagement rate has been seen in these cases. Have you gotten any people contact you, or have you heard stories from other women? Have you had this experience of people wanting to reach out and tell you how they felt?
Yes, I have. And I feel incredibly grateful that readers feel comfortable coming to me with this. I think the confessional nature of the book at times really allows people to see me as a person, not just as a someone behind the scenes. And yeah, the messages that I've got from readers, thanking me for putting this into words and for giving them the book that, as I said, I wish I had had. It's been so wonderful. And yeah, if I got nothing else out of this book, if I got that, I would be incredibly grateful. There is a sort of aspect of a burden to it as well, though. People will often sort of come in hot with their story. And I was talking to a friend who is a comedian who works in mental health as well. And yeah, we were talking about people coming and sharing their stories with you. And it's one thing for people to come up, at an event or send an email, but when you're getting Instagram DMs at 10 p.m. on a Saturday night, it's wonderful that people want to share that experience immediately, but it's also difficult. It's a lot to take in personally. And so, yeah, I haven't found how to deal with it yet, but there is a kind of burden. But I would much, much rather have that experience and know that it comes from people connecting with the book and that it demonstrates a real need for the book, rather than the alternative.
Exactly. And I think there really was and is a need for the book. And it must feel quite rewarding to get this kind of feedback from strangers. But I wanted to also stress another thing. Again, I feel like this interview is completely based on the things that I liked in the book, but I have you now for this time, so I don't care. I'm going to ask you the stuff that I really want to know. So it's not just the honesty and rawness and the kind of unfortunate universality of this experience of illness, but the thing that I really liked and that I also hadn't seen much of is, so I take it from kind of the timeline of the pop culture that you've written about, that we're both millennials. You're just a little bit older than me, but I was kind of figuring it out from how old you were when Destiny's Child broke up, and how old I was. And I loved this part that, and I think that's what makes it additionally relatable. You really talked about these things which are a part of our millennial lives. Instagram, the memes. I really have not, and I read this stuff, and I haven't read about a person, discussing the memes and the Instagram pages. And it's so true. Like, I am on there all the time as well. Half of the things I follow are, endo space, endo memes, stuff like that. And then celebrating certain artists, like your connection with Beyonce. I feel like that's also, even if a reader doesn't particularly like Beyonce, I think people of our generation get this, what an artist can mean to you. And you really painted a whole life, like what it's like, not just the illness, but the life of a generation. And I really loved that. And I was wondering if all of these, and there are so many pop culture references, you talk about a lot of shows, a lot of music, the playlist the chapter. I thought that was such a great idea to make the chapter as a playlist. it's a bit playful, but also, if you know the song, you know why you just get the text. And I was wondering if you did this consciously, if you wanted to feature pop culture, kind of give it a place on purpose, or if this just came out because it really is such a big part of your life. If you understand what I'm trying to ask.
Yes, thank you. It's such a lovely way of wording it. Yes, it was a deliberate choice. And that essentially was, I tried to use pop culture as a way of showing, of giving an image to, and of this invisibility of what can't be seen. There are a few sides to it. Like you say, this is, I am in the elder end of the millennial generation, but there are just, lots of things that are really common entry points, I believed, for a lot of people. And I wanted to use that as a way of entry point. I had one reader in mind as I was writing the whole book, and I wanted them to be able to understand what was happening after they had read the book. And I wanted the book to be universally available to people. I don't have an academic background, so there is a kind of, kind of popular style to my writing as well. But I wanted part of the way that the book is structured around pop culture is to allow for the people in your life who you feel least comfortable talking to about this stuff to not only learn from it, but to feel safe in learning from it. Like you say, there's a lot of kind of confessional stuff and a lot of quite difficult material to read within the book. But I hope it's also funny. I hope it's also, a moment within this generation to discuss how the way that we communicate to each other is different from that of the previous generation, and how that therefore affects our care and our day-to-day support of people in situations like yourself and mine. I think also, I've been a critic for some time as well, and I love doing that because I love championing work and championing other artists. And for me, this was a way to give thanks to the artists who have really meant a lot to me and whose work has really kind of helped pull me out of some quite dark situations. Work like Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, the comedy of Maria Bamford, these, and, SpongeBob SquarePants. These have all had a real impact in my life. I think I wanted to use it to give balance to the reader, but it also had a great balance to myself in that when it was often, quite physically and mentally taxing writing this book, in that I had to, by its nature, I had to re-experience some of the trauma that I had been through, I, was really writing about some of the worst times in my life. So to be able to leave that when I needed to protect myself, and then be able to, write about a comic, write about a sitcom, write about Beyonce, really helped my own health in the writing of the book as well. Yeah.
That's very interesting, because I, as the reader, felt these parts were kind of, they do the same for the reader, because it's like you take a little break from the very heavy stuff and then you talk about a certain show. Or, I mean, you've mentioned so many, like BoJack Horseman, Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, as you said, Conversations with Friends, SpongeBob SquarePants, the tragic ending of Destiny's Child, and then the glorious rise of Beyonce. And for the reader as well, it's I think it did for the readers what it did for you too, that it was kind of breaking, something very serious. And then these chapters also aren't less serious, but they're maybe less heavy. I would use the word less heavy to read. So that's very interesting, that kind of the reader and writer goal and experience was quite similar in this case. I really love that. And since I can at least assume from the book that you're active in the online world, I love the part where you described what you choose to put on stories and how you choose to present yourself, because we all do that. It's so true, and we all pretend it's not true, that it's all spontaneous, but you do think of that. I am going to assume that you have also noticed a rise in kind of especially endometriosis awareness through profiles and endo influencers, so to speak, in the last couple of years, especially. Why do you think that is? Why do you think that these pages are becoming so popular? Or better put, that people who suffer with illnesses are now getting either more space or more bravery, or both, to kind of take up this online space? What's your personal kind of take on that? Because it was just silence for centuries, and I feel like we're in a moment now where people are really starting to talk through either imagery or seriously. And why do you think that now is the time for this?
It's a great question. I think it's a little simplistic to think that millennials are changing the world when it comes to this stuff. I think there has been enormous legwork put in by women and underrepresented minorities before us. I know in my own experience that my mum has been a real champion of my care, and I've seen her beg doctors and nurses, emergency staff, to really give me the time that my illness and pain and distress deserves. And I think, her generation really did so much in terms of access to contraception, access to abortion, the feminism of the 60s and 70s. And I think they therefore didn't want their daughters to have to fight as hard as they had to. And they really understood the work required to break through some of those patriarchal barriers. And it's meant that women of our generation and younger are really, we have the confidence to speak out. I think there is also something to the timing in terms of the Me Too movement, and in terms of women and non-binary people really drawing a line in the sand, and really just refusing to deal with some of the challenges that we've had for such a long time. And that there have been periods of my life where I've bled for 3 out of 4 weeks in a month. I have been bedridden for a large portion of that as well. It's affected my study, my work, my relationships. I think, we just, as a society, but particularly as a community of people with these similar experiences, we've really kind of taken the moment as well, and really kind of pushed it for as much as we can. I think, it's also, you mentioned the use of Instagram, and when I knew we were chatting today, I mean, the first thing I did was sorry to stalk you, but the first thing that I did was go and look at your Instagram page. And I saw that you had posted a lot about endometriosis, and by looking at the kinds of things that you post, I felt I could understand who you were a little, even from, my little town here in Adelaide in Australia. And the world is open in a way that it's never been before. And I can relate to some of your experiences. I'm sure there are people throughout the rest of the world who are able to do the same as, I had done yesterday. And it's also just, it's become so easy to spread information and to spread lived experience, because we have these new lines of communication. There's also something to these being like primarily visual forms as well, I think. What has been often kind of behind closed doors, again, to go back to the qualitative, quantitative issue before, it's hard to understand what people like you and I go through on a day-to-day basis, in words, in numbers. But when you can see these things, you can, there are people with endo that I follow who will post from the bathroom floor, from emergency beds, from I will see them crying, I will see them writhing in pain, it's easier for me to see a kinship there, because I'm not having to translate it from a written form. So I don't want to give too much of a amp up to the metaverse, but yeah, I think, Instagram in particular has really changed the way that we communicate with each other. For people younger than me, I think this is now like Snapchat and TikTok and that kind of thing. Gen Z are really, really doing the work out there on TikTok. They're actually phenomenal in their political engagement and awareness. It's just that, they express that through image and video rather than letters to the editor in a newspaper that previous generations may have used.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, well, the internet, I'm a fan of the internet when it's used right. You are correct. If all the tools, I mean, we have so many platforms now, and it is funny, like you say, that we are literally on the opposite side of the world right now, but we could get a peek into each other's lives and find a mutual point. And this whole interview, actually, all three of us are on different continents right now, which I find completely amazing. And I wouldn't want to put you on the spot, Donna, but as Kylie was talking, and as she was mentioning the previous generation of women who kind of did the legwork, so to speak. I mean, I think women have a long way ahead in terms of feminism, that there will always be a fight to fight, but we do have the freedom now because of the previous generations to speak more openly. And I just wanted to, if I may, ask you something, as well, as a person that is not our generation and listening to us now talk for quite a bit about the internet and Instagram and pop artists. Can you relate to that, or how do you see that? How do you feel about as well what Kylie just explained, now that we are now able to use these different mediums? Because it is the goal is the same, but we are doing it differently than you did it.
Right. Well, I flashed back to when I was a teenager and I got a copy of Our Bodies, Ourselves, and I still have that. I don't know if you're familiar with it, but it was a paper pamphlet, essentially, that I bought at a bookstore that had all the information I felt that I needed about my body as a woman, about sex, about contraception. And I was a teenager and young woman during a time when the pill came out, IUDs came out, that there were so many different ways to make your choices about your sexuality. And I went through a period where I went through in vitro fertilization with my son, and for my son, and my husband and I went through it. And when I first started that, there was nothing, there were no books other than research books about in vitro fertilization. I didn't have any friends I could talk to, who were going through that same experience of infertility, with me. And there was actually one friend, but it was that compromised in some ways our relationship. It was a very hard one to be sisters in that pain in a way. So, participating on Instagram, I have a son who's a millennial, so I feel like I've learned a lot from him about it, but I also feel that it's given me the opportunity to learn more too. And the transmission of information is something, and stories is something that has always been very important to me. And one of the reasons why we do Intima, because we feel that both patients and practitioners have to have that space where they can talk about things that no one talks about. And I highly applaud that aspect of Instagram. I'm not familiar really with TikTok, other than my son sometimes does TikTok, but I figure if I stick with Instagram and Twitter, that's about my bandwidth these days if I want to get anything done, because there is an element of going down that rabbit hole that that I find is something that I find a little destructive or strange, that you can get lost in how big that universe is. But I loved hearing about how it's a way for, people who have a certain focus or interest, or want to find others in a group, um, and relate to them and understand their own bodies or their own conditions. I find it really honest. I find it really courageous for people to be so honest, and I think it's amazing. It's amazing how the transmission of information has accelerated. Having been a magazine editor for over 25 years, that idea of that we would work 3 months in advance to research, report, write a story that that now people could do within a week and get published within a week is really exciting to me.
Well, thank you for chiming in and for being willing to share that with us.
Thank you for
I mean,
asking.
why not use this opportunity when we already have, all of us here? So I hope you don't mind that I asked you.
No, not at all. Thank you so much for asking me.
Yeah, and just to get back to Kylie, I would like to know, so obviously a part of your intent, well, even if you intended or not, but a big part of your audience will be people who suffer either from endometriosis or bipolar disorder. But who is this book for? Do you think that it can have a wider audience? Do you think that did you want to, actually, is a better way to phrase it, did you want people who have none of these experiences to read it and to understand it? Like, did you think of a target audience, let's say, when you were writing, or maybe not when you were writing, but now, who would you want this to reach?
No, as I was writing, I was very conscious of the readership that I was seeking. Like I've said, I wanted this book to be for the 13-year-old version of myself. But I desperately wanted this book to be read by doctors, by family members, by colleagues, by a broader audience. 176 million people worldwide have endometriosis. We all know someone who has it, whether you know that yet or not. And yeah, it was really important to me to reach out to people needing to understand or wanting to understand more about it. And yeah, like I said, that intention was a big part in why pop culture was used so much in the book. It's a much easier sell for people, I think, to say, hey, here's this essay about SpongeBob SquarePants and mental illness, rather than, hey, here's an essay about mental illness that speaks quite openly about suicidal ideation. I very much wanted a broad readership, and like I said before, I really did have a particular reader in mind who had not finished high school but who is incredibly inquisitive and an important person in my life. And I wanted them to be able to feel comfortable picking up the book, to be able to read it easily, to understand further what was happening to me, and to enjoy it. And I think I also, in using those pop culture references, I also kind of wanted to provide a reading list of sorts for people who had read the book and wanted to find out further information from that people might go and watch Please Like Me or Crazy Ex-Girlfriend, or who might listen to particular songs in a different way, who, I talk towards the end of the book about the fact that my reading of Conversations with Friends by Sally Rooney was markedly different from the way that a lot of my friends had read it, because I could see the pervasiveness of endometriosis in one of the central characters throughout the book, rather than just the diagnosis at the end. So getting people to think differently about the way that they're interacting with not only the people who in their lives who have endometriosis or mental illness, but the way that they are interacting with representations of that as well.
Well, thank you for that. And I have just one last question for you. And it's about the ending, really. Mm-hmm. And this is always what I'm curious about when I pick up a book on similar topics. How do you end a book like this? Because it's not over, right? You can't have this traditional ending of, and then there was a cure and now I'm fine, or or any sort of like very grounded conclusion like that, because it's an ongoing thing. It's not a typical memoir in the sense, hey, I had this adventure and it has a beginning and an ending. It's an ongoing thing. You finished writing, we are reading it, but you are still living it. So how did you decide how to end it and when to end it? When was the right moment, or what was the right way of finishing it? I would think that it's a bit of a challenge to come up with an ending for an open story.
Yeah, that's a really great question. I didn't write all of the chapters in the order in which they appear in the book, but I did write that one last. So there was a bit of reflection back on what had been written before it. Like you say, when you write memoir, it's quite difficult to know when to stop. Other friends of mine who have published memoirs, well, we've talked about this, particularly when you're writing about lived experiences that continue. It was difficult at times in the writing of the book to know when to stop adding anecdotes from my own life, because these things would just continue to happen as I was writing the book and as I was editing the book and as the book was released. But I hate when I hear writers speak at festivals or things and they're like, oh, I just knew, or like, oh, it just came to me. But it just kind of felt right. And I think I needed to step back a little when I was writing that chapter. And what was interesting to me at the time was, and I only kind of realized this as I was writing that final chapter, was that unknowingly the book had a progression of the, I guess, life cycle of diagnosis. So the book begins where I don't have the language to express what is happening to me. So I need memes or I really need those pop culture references to be able to explain to people what's happening. But then slowly throughout the book, by way of these references, by way of eventually finding doctors who listened, who educated, who advocated, I began to understand what was happening to me. And so towards the end of the book, it's no longer using references to explain what's going on. It's the power of those references in the representation of what's going on and how dearly it's required. Yeah, so the final chapter uses conversations with friends and crazy ex-girlfriend to say, here are people talking about diagnosis. Here are people talking about how difficult it is. Here are people showing how messy and fraught it is going through that process. And so, yeah, it didn't happen intentionally, but once I caught up with myself and realized that it had happened, yeah, I kind of knew that that was it. I also had the benefit of having a great editor who would catch me up on certain things and say, you know, you don't have to put everything into this book. You can save some stuff for the next one, which was very useful.
Okay, well, thank
you. Yeah.
Sorry. Thank you for answering that question. It's a very interesting perspective. And yeah, now that you say it, it is kind of full circle, ending with diagnosis and these kind of two, you expressed or illustrated the two types of reactions to diagnosis, one being negative and the other being positive. And that really is true for people. Some people get devastated by getting a diagnosis, and some people are just thrilled to finally be able to name it. So I also liked that you included both. You didn't kind of claim that one thing is better than the other. But yeah, that was all really that I wanted to talk to you about. Feel free to add something if you would like, and you, Donna, as well. And I'm just very grateful, Kylie, that you agreed to talk to us and that you wrote this book. And I honestly really enjoyed it. And it's just a pleasure to have been, to have gotten this opportunity to speak with you like this. And they're definitely needed books. And I read on your website that you're working on a new one, and I can't wait for that one to go out and to come out. So thank you for everything that you do for the Endo Sisters.
I have to say, one of the things that I find so refreshing, and I think it was about true in my generation too, is that people take themselves seriously, but not too much. They're willing to laugh about themselves. They're willing to expose things about themselves, and it's that honesty and bravery, I think, that people really find. Your audience has found you, and I feel that way a little bit about Intima as well. We don't have time to really promote ourselves that much, but what we want to promote are those really unique voices telling these stories in ways that people find compelling, and also feel as if they can relate to them. And that's a gift. That's to have an original voice that speaks to people is one of the things that I think is exciting about your generation, having that original voice. So thank you. Thank you both.
Thank you so much, Donna, and thank you so much, Alekszandra. I am so glad you reached out so that I know about Intima and I can read further, because yeah, this idea of narrative medicine is so interesting to me, and I'm so glad that there is a place for it. Yeah, and like you say, it's there is a community of people searching for this voice and searching for almost validation, I guess, of their experience. And there's so much to be had from just knowing that you're not alone in a really difficult situation. Yeah, I'm really grateful to have spoken to you and to know that the book connected with you. That means a lot to me.
Thanks to both of you, and enjoy your Saturday. It's so funny to me that I still have my Friday night to go through.
I know.
Yeah, I'm going to sleep now. It's like 1 a.m.
Yeah, there's a portal into the future.
I know, definitely.
Yeah, exactly.
It's
We're doing a little bit of time traveling.
It's mind-blowing. It really is. So anyway, thank you very much, both of you, and have a good weekend, and we'll be in touch.